Okay, so this is my action research multimedia presentation. So I'm going to start off with this section called my problem statement. So for my statement of core values, I decided to focus on the ethical standards for the profession of teaching, which includes care, respect, trust, and integrity. So I decided to then focus on care. Now, what is care? According to the OCT document, it says the ethical standards of care includes an insight for developing students' potential. So then I thought, how could you develop students' potential, or what could you do as a teacher to develop students' potential? So I thought of thinking different teaching strategies which will enable students to develop in their academic learning. So think about what teaching strategies can I use which will ensure that students will have a deeper understanding of the concepts they're learning, and it will promote that long-term understanding and a deeper thinking of concepts covered in classrooms. So the statement of the research problem is I'm focusing on to using a teaching strategy which will promote or help in deeper learning, problem solving, student growth, and academic development for all students in a science classroom. By that I mean, if I focus on the teacher directed strategy or if I focus on the student directed learning strategy, which one will be better? Which one will prove better to have students have that deeper learning, deeper understanding of knowledge coming to them in a science classroom? So which strategy is going to be better to use? Is it going to be the teacher directed or is it going to be the inquiry based teaching strategy? So I'm focusing on two different classrooms here with two different strategies. So, looking back at the core values and the issues at hand and the problems to be solved, is I come up with this research question which says, what is the impact on student achievement in science when using inquiry based learning as an instructional strategy compared to teacher directed strategies? So, we need to look at different definitions of different terms to understand this research better. So, some of the terms which are being used in this context include inquiry based learning, which means you start off by posing a question, problem solve, or a scenario, and then you let the students choose how they want to answer those questions rather than just presenting the facts. So, it's often assisted by a facilitator. And then compared to the teacher-directed learning strategy, which is primarily the teacher is responsible for creating, presenting lessons to the students rather than letting them understand the concepts by collaborating in groups or in partners and so on. So, generally, instructional strategies mean interpreting data, providing evidence, communicating explanation of concepts learned, and then we all know what assessment means. It means gathering, discussing information from multiple sources, and then reflective practice. I included that in because it involves teachers looking back and evaluating the degree of success. This is important because in this case, for this research, the teacher is focusing on different strategies. So she needs to do reflective practice in order to go back and think about which one was better. Was the teacher directed learning strategy better, or was the inquiry based learning strategy was better for the students for to promote their learning and understanding in a better way. So I have looked at some literature which covers some of the topics which I have talked about so far. And for example, this first one, it says the summary of the article was that it covers the effects of inquiry based science education on students' academic achievement, science process skills, attitudes towards science, compared to the traditional style of learning, which is the teacher directed approach. Results show that inquiry based learning had a positive and higher levels of academic achievement, and specific teaching and learning method, though, had a positive and medium levels of effect on their science process skills. So, this literature goes on further to talk about the effects on the science process skills and the attitude of students towards science. So, in the second literature which I reviewed, it talks about how students showed a declining interest in learning science up to now. So, how do you engage young students? The article suggests the inquiry based learning method, which has a positive effect on students, and then students' knowledge and attitude towards science changes with the IBL, which is the inquiry based learning. So, teachers now who have more confidence in their ability to teach science have a higher frequency of inquiry in their classroom. So, the more confident you are as a teacher, the more confident you will be in applying the inquiry based learning strategy in your classroom. But then the article also says that teachers need that support mechanism to make them more confident, which I totally agree with. So the third literature which I got to look at shows the connection between the attitudes towards science and the way science is being taught. So inductive approach versus the inductive approach, which is inquiry versus teacher directed approach. The inquiry based gives more space for observation and experimentation, and this is considered one of the most effective ways to improve science education now. So the three different literature which I got to look at really shows a lot of different perspective, which includes the attitude towards science, how students are engaged, their interest in science, their academic achievement, and what's engaging the student more overall. Is it the inquiry based, or is it the is it the traditional style of teaching, which is the teacher directed strategy? So, using all of those different perspectives, which I got to look at from the literature and then from what interests me as well, which I want to focus on directly, is the inquiry based learning better, or is the teacher directed learning ways better? Or is it somewhere in the middle? But I want to come up with an answer which one is going to be better so that I can apply that in my classrooms as a teacher. So, going to my next section, which is my research plan, and it talks all about the data sources. So I'm looking at two different data sources, the qualitative and the quantitative. My qualitative data source is coming from checklists and student work exit card. And for the quantitative sources, it's coming from quiz scores and test scores. These will come from two different classrooms. So the one classroom, which is going to be the inquiry-based learning classroom, and one classroom is going to be the teacher-directed learning classroom. But they both will be at the same level, and they both will be using those same data sources, the qualitative and the quantitative, in the same amount, in the same frequency, and so on. So, why did I choose these data sources? It's because these tests and quizzes gives me a more direct quantitative result of student learning, and it allows easy comparison of student scores between teacher-directed and inquiry-based teaching strategy. And then using checklists makes data collection easy while referring to success criteria constantly. And then the exit cards here, it gives the student more flexibility to show their understanding in their own words, and the exit cards gives a more formative type of assessment for me to even look at, or they do summative assessments. So I chose those specific data sources according to their strengths because I believe the test and the quiz scores are appropriate for this research. The scores are manageable and they're practical, so you're really collecting scores and you can manage it, collect it somewhere. And then checklist ensures success criteria is being met throughout, so you can always have that checklist with you handy and always refer back to the success criteria because we want to make sure the students are learning the concepts being delivered to them. And then the exit card shows how well the students are understanding a topic. But then I looked at some other data sources which could have been used, like video surveys, photos, and audios, but really I thought they would be a weak data source for my research which I'm making because it does not really give me a direct or practical idea on how well students are learning. It can act like maybe more of a supplementary um, data to go with the tests and the quizzes and the checklists and the exit cards. So that's why I decided not to use those but then use the other ones. So for the triangulation of the data which I'm using, I have decided to use four types. And if you look at the top, it says scores of tests and quizzes of all students from one inquiry-based learning classroom and one teacher-directed based learning classroom. So the scores will come from all science units being taught in both the classrooms. In both the classrooms, there should be the same number of units being taught, the same topic, the same amount of data collection at the same grade level, which is really important. And then if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, it says the exit cards. The students will be submitting exit card before each quiz they do to demonstrate their learning and give them an opportunity to discover how much they're learning and give me an opportunity as a teacher to discover how much they have learned. And then at the bottom right hand corner, the checklist will be used for each student in each lesson to keep track of the success criteria and if it's being met or not. So how am I going to make this data more valid and more reliable? Really what I'm doing here is I'm collecting quizzes and tests and their scores at different and numerous times for different concepts covered in science units. So I'm not just doing it for one unit, I'm not just doing it for a certain group of students, I'm not just doing it for just a few number of times, but I am collecting the same type and frequency of data from both classes in the inquiry-based classroom and the teacher-directed learning-based classroom. And then going to make sure to remain objective and record exactly as you see from both classes using these checklists and then by looking at the exit cards to show students understand in different ways other than just testing them and giving them those quizzes, and have at least three sources. So I have quizzes, tests, checklists, and exit cards, so I actually have four. I also want to mention that the tests and the quizzes don't necessarily have to be in the form of a question and an answer format, but they can also be in form of a problem solving, in form of a lab, in form of a demo, in form of a presentation, and so on. So it's open. So, who is doing this and where is this happening? So, really, it's simple. The participants are the classroom teacher and the students in the science classroom. So, the teacher is going to be the one collecting the data from the students and then putting them in separate folders for each student meant specifically for this research. And then where's it going to happen? In the science classrooms at the same grade level and in two classes. One class is going to be the uh, the um, the class which is based on the inquiry learning, and then one class based on the teacher directed learning. So the same teacher is going to do both classes. So if I'm a science teacher and I have two, say, grade 7 classes, I would use that one grade 7 science classroom to do the inquiry based style, and then that the other classroom, grade 7, to do the teacher directed learning style, and then compare the both that way. So this takes me to my third and last section, which is called my research plan, which includes data collection and procedure. So this is my timeline. This is how I'm organizing, how I'm collecting the data. Quizzes, I will have 2 quizzes per unit, maybe bi-weekly from September to June. Tests, 1 test per unit in 5 to 6 weeks, September to June. And then I'm using checklists per lesson because I want to keep track of the success criteria from September to June, and the exit cards before each quiz, so 2 per unit, because it will give the students a chance to study and demonstrate their learning. Gives me a chance to see how much they've learned and if they're ready for a quiz or test. Now, of course, it really also depends on how long the units are going to take, because as we know from our practicums and from our experience, things don't always go as planned, so sometimes a lesson might take longer or shorter. I also want to mention that tests do not have to be in the question and answer format, like I've said again, but they can be problem solving presentations and so on, as long as they're consistent throughout the 2 classes which I'm using to collect my data from. So, the ethical considerations, focusing on the ethics of hope, ethics of caring, of openness, of responsibility. So, making sure the action research is based on a concern for the whole school community and just on how to deliver the curriculum. So, really, my concern here is broad. I want to make sure all the students have a deeper understanding. So, which teaching strategy should I use? And also caring about the welfare of both students and the teacher should be foremost, so not make it too overwhelming. Make sure things are open and open with the school members, and being responsible, so the welfare of students must be kept in mind. So are the students being told they're being part of the research plan? Openness, have I talked about it with the school principal, admin, and so on? Gotten all the permission, all the consent, everyone is aware of what I'm doing and how I'm collecting, and make sure what I'm collecting is also confidential to avoid any embarrassment. So these ethical consideration questions also follow from what I've mentioned before. Did I get a consent? Did I protect all the data? Is it being confidential? So I'm making sure data is not being mixed between different students and they're being in separate folders, and I'm the one supervising it because I'm collecting it. I'm responsible for all of this data, and I've talked about it with people. I've talked about the research of what I'm doing with the people in the community, and making sure that my research question really is trying to build a positive relationship with the students, with the staff, with the principal, with the admin, with even the parents, because I've decided to focus on caring and making sure they learn better, and this is what we want to focus on as teachers, is making sure students come to a classroom and they can all learn better. So finally, this research question, once implemented, will provide results which will lead to an answer to which teaching style the inquiry or the teacher directed will ensure students deeper learning. And then caring for students learning is a teacher's duty. So if inquiry style learning proves to be a better teaching strategy, then I will ensure I teach through the inquiry in science classrooms. And yeah, so thank you for listening for my presentation, and I hope you got something useful out of this as well.